We live in a world that constantly suggests that more is better. More money, more upgrades, more choices, more things. And for a long time that idea feels logical. Because if wealth means having more, then naturally the path to wealth should also mean getting more. More income, more purchases, more visible success. But something interesting happens when you start looking closely at how people actually build financial stability over long periods of time. Many of them are not trying to maximize everything. They are trying to simplify, not because they dislike money, not because they reject ambition, but because they understand something that is easy to miss. Building wealth is not only about how much comes in, it is also about how much complexity leaves your life. This is where minimalist money rules begin. And despite the name, minimalism is not about owning nothing. It is not about empty rooms or never buying anything again. Financial minimalism is different. It is about creating enough clarity that your money starts working with you instead of constantly being pulled in 10 different directions. Because the more financial noise there is, the harder it becomes to build anything meaningful. And if I had to reduce financial growth into a few principles, the first thing to understand is that most financial problems are not income problems. They are structure problems. People often assume that if money is tight, the solution is to earn more. And sometimes that is true. But in many cases, the real issue is that money does not have a clear direction. It enters your life, and then slowly gets scattered across too many small decisions. Without a system, even good income becomes difficult to manage. So minimalist money thinking begins with structure, not motivation. Not hustle, structure. Because structure determines what happens to money when discipline is low, when emotions are high, and when life is busy. And that is when financial behavior usually breaks. One of the first minimalist money rules is understanding invisible spending. Most people think they know where their money goes, but they only track the obvious parts. Rent, food, transport, big purchases. What they don't see is the slow leakage happening in the background. Subscriptions that are forgotten. Small daily purchases that feel meaningless individually. Convenience spending that replaces planning. Impulse decisions made out of boredom or stress. Just this once choices that repeat more often than expected. None of these feel dangerous in isolation, but together they form something powerful. A silent financial drain. And the reason this matters is not the amount itself, it is the repetition. Because wealth is not destroyed by one big mistake. It is slowly reduced by repeated small ones. Minimalist thinking starts by making these invisible patterns visible again. Because what you can see, you can control. And what you can control, you can change. Another key rule is understanding lifestyle expansion. This is one of the strongest forces working against financial progress. Because income naturally increases over time for many people. Skills improve, opportunities grow, experience builds, but spending often increases at the same speed, sometimes even faster. And the increase does not feel reckless. It feels justified. A slightly better home, a slightly better phone, a slightly better lifestyle standard, a slightly more expensive version of normal life. The problem is not improvement. The problem is automatic adjustment. Because when lifestyle increases automatically with income, nothing actually changes in terms of freedom. You are still operating at the same level of pressure, just with higher numbers. Minimalist money thinking introduces one critical delay. Not forever, just a pause. A gap between earning more and spending more. And that gap is where financial progress quietly forms. Because during that time, money is not immediately absorbed into lifestyle. It accumulates, and accumulation creates flexibility. Flexibility creates options, and options create wealth over time. Another important principle is reducing financial friction. Financial friction is anything that makes money harder to understand, harder to track, or harder to manage. It is not always obvious. Multiple bank accounts, too many payment methods, scattered subscriptions, unclear spending categories, money moving in different directions without a system. Individually, this looks normal, but together, it creates confusion. And confusion is expensive, because when you are not fully aware of your financial system, decisions become reactive instead of intentional. You stop optimizing money and start reacting to it. Minimalism simplifies the system so that money becomes easier to follow. And when money becomes easier to follow, it becomes easier to control. Then comes one of the most powerful minimalist rules: separating emotion from spending. Because most spending is not logical. It is emotional. Stress spending happens when people feel overwhelmed. Boredom spending happens when people feel unstimulated. Comparison spending happens when people feel behind. Reward spending happens after effort or achievement. Impulse spending happens in moments of low awareness. And none of these are rare. They are normal human behavior. But normal behavior is not always financially efficient. Because emotional decisions prioritize immediate relief over long-term stability. Minimalist finance does not try to remove emotion completely. That is unrealistic. Instead, it introduces awareness, a pause, a small interruption between feeling and action. And in many cases, that pause is enough to change the decision entirely. Because once emotion settles, many purchases lose their urgency. Another principle is understanding the difference between cost and maintenance. Most people evaluate purchases only by price, but price is only the beginning. Every purchase comes with hidden maintenance: time, energy, recurring costs, upkeep, pressure to use it, pressure to justify it, and sometimes even stress. A cheap decision can become expensive over time if it adds complexity, while a more expensive decision can sometimes be efficient if it removes complexity. Minimalism focuses on total cost over time, not just upfront cost. Because wealth is not only about what you buy, it is about what your choices require from you afterward. Another rule is building systems instead of relying on discipline. Because discipline is inconsistent. It depends on mood, environment, stress, and motivation. Systems do not. A system works even when you are tired, even when you are distracted, even when you do not feel like being careful. Automatic saving structures, simple budgeting frameworks, fixed financial rules, pre-decided spending limits. These reduce the number of decisions you need to make. And fewer decisions means fewer opportunities for mistakes. Over time, this creates stability without constant effort. Then there is a deeper shift that happens gradually. Money stops being something you constantly react to and starts becoming something you manage with intention. At this point, financial life becomes less chaotic. Not because income suddenly changed, but because behavior changed. And behavior is what actually determines outcomes long-term. Another minimalist principle is understanding that not all growth is progress. Sometimes adding more creates imbalance. More income without structure leads to more spending. More spending leads to more responsibility. More responsibility leads to more pressure. And more pressure reduces freedom. So growth without control can actually reduce quality of life. Minimalism introduces balance into growth. Not stopping it, but guiding it. Eventually, you begin to notice a pattern. The most financially stable people are not necessarily the ones doing the most. They are often the ones doing less, but with more intention, less noise, less unnecessary spending, less scattered financial behavior, and more clarity, more structure, more awareness, more control. And when you reach that point of understanding, the idea of wealth changes completely. Because wealth is no longer about accumulation alone. It becomes about efficiency. How effectively your money supports your life without creating unnecessary pressure. And that is where minimalist money rules become powerful. Not because they restrict growth, but because they remove everything that prevents growth from being sustainable. And in the end, the real goal is not to have more of everything. It is to have enough clarity that everything you do have actually works in your favor.